So welcome to anybody who's watching on YouTube as well afterwards. This is the fourth in my series on looking at David. So far we've looked at when he was first anointed to be the king, when Samuel anointed him. We looked at the wonderful, amazing story of David and Goliath. And last time we looked at Saul and his increasing envy of David. And if you want to listen to any of those talks, I think they're all on the website or on the YouTube part of Worcester Vineyard. If you want to learn how to do anything, it's always a good idea to watch somebody else and learn from their life, learn from their example. And this morning, although this is a series about David, we're also sort of leaking into some of the characters that surround his story. And this morning we're going to look at Jonathan, Saul's son, who, you know how sometimes you get those essay questions that say compare and contrast, and this is a complete contrast to his father Saul. Jonathan is a completely different character and has a completely different attitude towards David. So we're going to think about this guy who is really, you might say he's a model follower of the king. And isn't that what we're all about? Trying to be. We want to be model followers of King Jesus and the anointed king. And just as David was the anointed king, Jonathan is a really, really perfect follower of David. I just love Jonathan. Jonathan is an amazing character, and he's courageous. And if you don't know it, following Jesus means you need to have some courage. As David and Sonia's stories this morning have reminded us, you just need the courage sometimes to step out in faith. But courage in lots of different ways, actually, to be a Christian and to be a follower of Christ. And Jonathan is a man of amazing courage, as we'll see. So let's get down to it. There's quite a lot of reading in this, but the writer of 1 Samuel actually is a great storyteller. So these are stories that come out through this. So we're starting where we left off last time. This is 1 Samuel 19. Saul told his son Jonathan and all the attendants to kill David. But Jonathan had a great liking to David and warned him, "My father Saul is looking for a chance to kill you. Be on your guard tomorrow morning and go into hiding and stay there. I will go out and stand with my father in the field where you are. I'll speak to him about you and will tell you what I find out." So Jonathan spoke well of David to Saul his father and said to him, "Let not the king do wrong to his servant David. He's not wronged you. What has he done? What he has done has actually greatly benefited you. He took his life in his hands when he killed the Philistine," that's Goliath. "The Lord won a great victory for all Israel, and you saw it and were glad. Why then would you do wrong to an innocent man like David by killing him for no reason?" And Saul listened to Jonathan and took this oath, "As surely as the Lord lives, David will not be put to death." As we'll see in the story, that promise didn't last very long, but anyway. So Jonathan called David and told him the whole conversation. He brought him to Saul, and David was with Saul as before. So we'll stop there for a minute. Now, the first thing I notice about Jonathan is that he's a peacemaker. He is determined to try and, if he can, reconcile his father to David. And he does that in this wonderful way. He appeals to him. He tells him what David has done and the fact that he's innocent. And for a while it actually works. And as followers of the king, we too are called to be peacemakers. That's our calling, to be that. And I was reminded of that passage from the Sermon on the Mount, that verse from the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." We're like him. Now in this world, increasingly, more and more, we see disorder and dysfunction and division, no matter what area of life that is, in work life, in politics, even in the church. But we are called to be those that bring peace and harmony and reconciliation, just as Jonathan did there, between, at least for a time anyway, between David and Saul. And I was just reminded, okay, what's my heart? Is my heart to be a peacemaker? Or am I more into stirring up trouble? Because some people are like that. They like to stir up trouble. You've heard it perhaps said that some people can start an argument in an empty room, and there are some people like that. Wherever they go, they just stir up trouble and controversy. Even Christians, actually, which is rather sad. But we are called to be people who are peacemakers, who want to bring the harmony and peace that is the kingdom of God. That's what the kingdom of God is. You know that one time Paul talks about an aroma, doesn't he? You know, the aroma of Christ. And you know, sometimes, you know, you have a smell and you go into a room and you say, what's that smell? And that's because it's not very nice. Other times you can go into a place and you think, ooh, what's that smell? And it's just the tone of voice tells you the difference, that because it's a pleasant aroma. We all carry an aroma. That's what Paul is saying to us. We all carry an aroma. Hopefully it's the aroma of Christ, which is the aroma of peace. But sometimes people actually carry that aroma of not peace, but strife. You know, whether it's, and sometimes that can be just how it is. I know, as if you've had a bad day and you come along to a Sunday morning and you know you're a bit grumpy, and you bring with you that aroma of grumpiness and that aroma of discord rather than the aroma of peace. Or you go to small group, or you go into work, or wherever it may be that you go. And we are called to always bring the aroma of peace and to be peacemakers. And it's not always possible to be peacemakers. For a time, a limited time, Jonathan managed to do that with David and Saul, but it didn't last. But we are called to be those that reconcile the world to the king. Just as David reconciled an enemy of David to him, so we too, as we preach the gospel, we are called to bring people back into friendship and to reconciliation with the king. Now, I said we can't always do that, but that's our aim. So your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to be a peacemaker. Okay. Let's read a little bit more. We're into chapter 20. There's a little bit in chapter 19 I missed out, but you can go and read it for yourself. It's a bit where David becomes an exile, and he's for several chapters, he's on the run, basically. There's this very strange thing where he has to flee in the middle of the night, and his wife puts an idol in the bed and pretends it's David, and Saul finds out, and it all kicks off, and then he's off, and Saul chases him, and they start this weird prophesying stuff. Anyway, you can all read it. It's really fun stuff, really weird. Anyway, this is it. So then David fled from Naioth at Ramah and went to Jonathan and asked, what have I done? What is my crime? How have I wronged your father that he's trying to kill me? Never, Jonathan replied. You're not going to die. Look, my father doesn't do anything, great or small, without letting me know. Why would he hide this from me? It isn't so. But David took an oath and said, your father knows very well that I've found favour in your eyes. And he has said to himself, Jonathan must not know this, or he will be grieved. Yet as surely as the Lord lives, and as you live, there is only a step between me and death. Jonathan said to David, whatever you want me to do, I'll do it for you. So David said, look, tomorrow is the new moon feast, and I'm supposed to dine with the king. But let me go and hide in the field until the evening of the day after tomorrow. If your father misses me at all, tell him, David earnestly asked my permission to hurry to Bethlehem, his hometown, because an annual sacrifice is being made there for his whole clan. If he says, very well, then your servant is safe. But if he loses his temper, you can be sure that he's determined to harm me. As for you, show kindness to your servant, for you have brought him into a covenant with you before the Lord. If I'm guilty, then kill me yourself. Why hand me over to your father? Never, Jonathan said. If I had the least inkling that my father was determined to harm you, wouldn't I tell you? David asked, who will tell me if your father answers you harshly? "Come," Jonathan said, "let's go out into the field." So they went out together. Then Jonathan said to David, "I swear by the Lord, the God of Israel, that I will surely sound out my father by this time the day after tomorrow. If he's favourably disposed toward you, will I not send you word and let you know? But if my father intends to harm you, may the Lord deal with Jonathan, be it ever so severely, if I do not let you know and send you away in peace. May the Lord be with you, as he's been with my father. But show me unfailing kindness like the Lord's kindness, as long as I live, so that I may not be killed. And do not ever cut off your kindness from my family, not even when the Lord has cut off every one of David's enemies from the face of the earth." So Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, "May the Lord call David's enemies to account." And Jonathan had David reaffirm his oath out of love for him, because he loved him as he loved himself. So that brings me to the second wonderful characteristic of Jonathan, and that he's a lover of the king, he's a lover of David. And he's described in that wonderful way of being that he loved David as he loved himself. That little phrase should ring a little bell with you. I'm sure it does. You'll know when Jesus was asked about the greatest commandments, one of them was this quote from Leviticus: "Do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against anyone among your people, but love your neighbour as yourself, for I am the Lord." As far as I know, and I could be wrong, so don't quote me on this, but as far as I know, this is the only time someone is described as actually doing that, loving somebody else in the Old Testament as they loved themselves. This is the extent and the depth of Jonathan's love for David, that he loved him as he loved himself. This is agape love. This is the love that is shown in the New Testament and shown on the cross. And it's the love that we're called to have too. It's the love that Jesus is looking for from us. You'll remember this from when I did a series on a while back from looking at 1 Corinthians 13 and love in that context. And I said that this is the definition of love from John Mark Cover's book, Live Low Lives. I can't better it, so I'm reminding you of it. It says that it's the compassionate commitment of the heart to delight in the soul of another and to will that person's good ahead of your own, no matter the cost to yourself. And Jonathan perfectly lives that out in this, because it is greatly, as we'll see, it's greatly costly to Jonathan to do what he does in loving David. But he does. He loves him with all his heart. And that's also, we sometimes, and rightly so, think of that love in the context of community and church and loving our neighbours and all the rest of it. But I was reminded of the fact that Jonathan loved the king that way, that we too are called to love Jesus with this same kind of love. And that was, of course, the question that Jesus asked Peter, wasn't it? Simon, son of John, do you love me? And he uses that word agape as well as the phileo word. But and that's the question that I found myself asking myself again this morning as I was preparing this. David, do you love me? Do you love me? That's the question each of us must answer. And really that's the heart of what it means to be a Christian, is loving the King. It's loving Jesus. It's not about, being a Christian is not about doing the right things, although as we love Jesus and the Holy Spirit enters our life, we begin to do the right thing, hopefully, as he changes us. But it's not primarily about that. It's not primarily about knowing stuff, knowledge, although it's important to know what we believe and to be able to explain it and all the rest of it. And to know the truth does set us free. But right at the heart of it, it's a love story. It's a story of God, the Father, the Son, the Spirit, who loved us with this same kind of agape love, that he considered our souls. He delighted in our souls, and he wanted them so much that he came to the cross for it, for us. And in the same way, what he wants, all he wants really, is our hearts, and everything else follows on. That's the key. So, Jonathan loved David as he loved himself, almost more than he loved himself, really. And I think just God is saying to us again this morning, is do you still love me? Is that how you feel about me? Do you love me as you love yourself? Okay. I told you Jonathan was amazing. He really is amazing. Let's carry on the story. Then Jonathan said to David, "Tomorrow is the new moon feast. You'll be missed because your seat will be empty. The day after tomorrow, toward evening, go to the place where you hid when this trouble began and wait by the stone of Ezel. I will shoot 3 arrows to the side of it, as though I was shooting at a target. Then I will send a boy and say, 'Go find the arrows.' If I say to him, 'Look, the arrows are on this side of you, bring them here,' then come, because as surely as the Lord lives, you're safe and there's no danger. But if I say to the boy, 'Look, the arrows are beyond you,' then you must go, because the Lord has sent you away. And about the matter you and I discussed, remember, the Lord is witness between you and me forever." So they set up this kind of secret message that will tell David whether he's in trouble or not. So David hid in the field, and when the new moon feast came, the king sat down to eat. He sat in his customary place by the wall opposite Jonathan, and Abner, that's the commander of the army, sat next to Saul. But David's place was empty. Saul said nothing that day, for he thought, well, something must have happened to David to make him ceremonially unclean. Surely he's unclean. But the next day, the second day of the month, David's place was empty again. Then Saul said to his son Jonathan, "Why hasn't the son of Jesse come to the meal?" You notice he can't, by this stage, even say his name. He's so full of hate. "Why hasn't the son of Jesse come to the meal, either yesterday or today?" Jonathan answered, "David earnestly asked me for permission to go to Bethlehem. He said, 'Let me go because our family is observing a sacrifice in the town, and my brother has ordered me to be there. If I have found favour in your eyes, let me get away to see my brothers. That is why he's not come to the king's table.' Saul's anger flared up at Jonathan, and he said to him, 'You son of a perverse and rebellious woman, don't I know that you've sided with the son of Jesse to your own shame, and to the shame of the mother who bore you? As long as the son of Jesse lives on this earth, neither you nor your kingdom will be established. Now send someone to bring him to me, for he must die.' 'Why should he be put to death? What has he done?' Jonathan asked his father. But Saul hurled his spear at him to kill him. It's a good job he's not a very good shot, because he'd have killed David and Jonathan by now, but he keeps missing, so that's good. Then Jonathan knew that his father intended to kill David. Jonathan got up from the table in fierce anger. On that second day of the feast he did not eat, because he was grieved at his father's shameful treatment of David. In the morning Jonathan went out to the field for his meeting with David. He had a small boy with him, and he said to the boy, 'Run and find the arrows I shoot.' As the boy ran, he shot an arrow beyond him. When the boy came to the place where Jonathan's arrow had fallen, Jonathan called out after him, 'Isn't the arrow beyond you?' Then he shouted, 'Hurry, go quickly, don't stop.' And the boy picked up the arrow and returned to his master. The boy knew nothing about all of this, only Jonathan and David knew. Then Jonathan gave his weapons to the boy and said, 'Go, carry them back to the town.' After the boy had gone, David got up from the south side of the stone and bowed down before Jonathan 3 times, with his face to the ground. And they kissed each other and wept together, but David wept the most. Jonathan said to David, 'Go in peace, for we have sworn friendship with each other in the name of the Lord, saying, the Lord is witness between you and me, and between your descendants and my descendants forever.' And then David left, and Jonathan went back to the town." Okay. That's the end of the story. What I notice next about this in the passage, that Jonathan refuses to compromise with evil. And he was under a lot of pressure to do it. You know, when Saul said, David must die, he was under great pressure. to do that. But he refused to compromise with evil even when it cost him. And that's, again, what a disciple of Jesus does. That we refuse to compromise with evil. And sometimes doing that is costly, and you have to be courageous to do it. I remember a story I was just reminded of, really, that I don't like telling personal stories particularly, but anyway, when I was first employed by the Borough Council in Kettering in Northamptonshire and started in the office, I was 18, and I was a Christian then. And probably within the first, I can't remember how long it was, first year or so of being there, all of the men in the office were going, and apparently it's something they did regularly, were going out to a strip club. And they said to me, David, we're going to the strip club, why don't you come? And this was the moment when I had to decide whether I was going to compromise with evil, even though I knew to stand against it was going to, put me in a very unfavourable light with all the men in the office. But I said, no, I'm not coming, I'm a Christian. I just briefly explained. I mean, I was only 18 or 19, so, I was a bit nervous about it all. And I said, no, I'm not going to come, because I knew it was wrong, and I knew that if I gave in to the pressure, Helen would ask me, where are you going? And I have to say, it's a night out with the office staff. He says, where are you going? she didn't know anything about this, but I'd have had to start lying, of course, and saying, no, we just go to the pub or something, and it goes on, you see, once you compromise with evil. But the interesting thing was that, obviously I refused to go, and they all went on their lads' night out and stuff. Interestingly, soon after that, it stopped, and they stopped going, and they never did it again, as far as I know, anyway. I'm pretty certain that it did stop. But anyway, it's just that moment when you there's a lot of pressure, and you think, am I going to compromise at this moment? Am I going to lie? Am I going to gossip about somebody? Whatever it might be. When we're under those moments of pressure, we do come under those moments of pressure. When it's just easier almost to say, oh, well, I'll lie about this. Or I'll, when you've made a mistake and you want to shift the blame somewhere else, which is what all your work colleagues probably do, They try and cover it up and say, oh, well, it's because of someone else. And instead of just owning up and saying, yeah, I got that wrong. Jonathan has tremendous courage, and he says, even though his life is in danger, it's not just my own popularity in the office that was in danger, his life is in danger. And he says, no, I'm not going to find David and make sure he's killed. I'm not going to do that. Fourthly, I noticed that he chooses the king. There's sometimes a time when you have to make a choice. Sometimes there isn't any middle ground, and you can't do anything else but either choose the Jesus way or the world's way, the culture's way. I can guarantee that you'll come into that situation from time to time. I know I have, like I said with my story. There's a time when you'll have to choose. We all have to make that choice, whether sometimes it's even above friends or family or work colleagues or above our culture. Sometimes, even sadly, for many, it's above their families. Those that come to faith in different cultures, sometimes they're choosing completely to be on their own, being ostracised by their family, perhaps even arrested. But they make the choice because the choice is the good choice, just as it was for Jonathan. This is a quote from Tim Chester's commentary on 1 Samuel. It's a great commentary. He says, ultimately there is a choice you and I must make. There can be no compromise. Something will be most precious to us, and we will be angry when it's threatened, and willing to bear the anger of others for our allegiance to it. We will bind our future to it. We will give authority to it. And there's only one that deserves that position of our ruler, and that's the Messiah, the Lord Jesus. So Jonathan is a hero of mine because he's put into this horrible choice, really, of choosing between his father and David. But he knows that David is the anointed king, and so he chooses David rather. And he knows his father's in the wrong, and so he chooses his allegiance to David. We're heading towards the close, but fifthly, I noticed that Jonathan is willing to give up his kingdom for the sake of David. I don't know how you are about giving up your kingdom, but giving up your kingdom is one of the hardest things to do. And we all have a kingdom that we like to have, you know, the place where we rule, where we're in control, where we're in charge. It's human nature. If you've brought up kids, you'll know that they get to the point, or you see young children, you'll know that they get to the point where they're sort of 2 or 3, when they want to start establishing their kingdom. And, their right to rule. And their favourite words become no and mine. And as it develops, I can remember if you get the kids in the back of the car, and there's that moment where they sort of delineate the seats between at the back. That's my kingdom, and brother or sister, don't encroach on my little bit of kingdom. And if they do, which of course inevitably they will, the squad will start breaking out, and then me as dad would think, actually the car's my kingdom anyway, so you just behave yourself in the back. What are you doing? But those words, no and mine, are very hard to lose, even when we grow up and get older. And often we still want to say no, and this is mine, and not yours, and yes, to Jesus. But Jonathan is absolutely willing to give up his kingdom. And as he's right, he's the heir to the throne. And Saul rightly says to him, he says, if as long as this son of Jesse is alive, you'll never be able to establish your kingdom, he says to Jonathan. And he's right, of course. As long as David is alive, Jonathan's never going to become king. But he doesn't mind. He knows that David's the anointed king. Already back in chapter 18, there's a passage where they swear allegiance to each other. And Jonathan gives David his robe, his sword, and his shield. All of the trappings of being king. And says to David, they're yours. They're yours. One of the hardest things that we have to do is to stop establishing our own kingdom and living for the kingdom of Jesus. And that's hard. It's not easy. And many people, they actually use the church as their kingdom as well. They want to be in charge. And I've come across Christians who think that the church is their own little fiefdom. And woe betide you if you try and break in to their rule of the kingdom. This isn't my church. It's not your church. It's Jesus' church. This life is not my life anymore. It's Jesus' life. And I need the courage to be able to say yes and yours to him, and not no and mine. So Jonathan is amazing. He gives up his kingdom. And lastly, he's willing to serve somebody else's agenda and not his own. He's willing to surrender his own ambitions, his desires, his goals, his agenda for the sake of David, his true king. And we too are called to serve someone else's agenda, not our own, but the king's, Jesus' agenda. And Jonathan did it because he trusted David. He trusted, he makes this pact with him and says, look, I trust my future and my future generations. And we'll see that in the story as it goes on, David did look after Jonathan's ancestors because he made that promise. He trusts him to do that. We can give up our agenda because we trust in the care of the king. I do trust, in my better moments anyway, I trust Jesus' care for my life that he does only desire good for me and not evil, not harm. So I'm willing to hopefully give up my agenda for his. So, Jonathan is a hero of mine for all of these reasons, because he's so selfless, so loving, so willing to give up his kingdom, his agenda. He chooses the king every time. And it's amazing that he does that when he could have just decided, no, I want to be king. Why shouldn't I inherit the kingdom? But he doesn't. He gives it all up. So the last question really is, are we like Saul? Saul, who holds on to power, is envious, hates David? Or are we like Jonathan, who loves the king and is willing to give up everything?